Okay, quick confession. Start season 6. I love the idea of being a go-with-the-flow gamer. Wake up, grab whatever game calls your name, and just let the vibes decide. But every January, I learn the same lesson. If I don't make a plan, I'm going to blink, and suddenly it's December. And I've played the same 3 comfort games 100 times, started 12 projects, finished 2, and somehow created a brand new tournament that I definitely did not need. So today is the antidote. Episode 236 is my annual plan, and the theme for 2026 is the year of women's sports, which basically means I'm bringing more women's leagues and women's sports stories to the table on purpose. And I'm actually going to track what happens when I do. All right, season 6 starts right now. This is the Tabletop SportCast. Welcome back to the Tabletop SportCast. I'm James, and this is the show where I talk about the hobby of sports board games. The projects I'm running, the games I'm playing, what I'm learning along the way, and the people in the community who are building and sharing great stuff. Today is episode 236, my annual plan. So let's get into it. I've kind of stumbled into a 3-year arc of themes. 2024, I really focused on fictional sports. It was basically pure creativity, but I also wanted to really find out what people were really feeling with the fictional sports. In 2025, I went back to my roots and I centered a theme around sports through the decades, history, time travel, replay variety. This year, 2026, is going to be my year of women's sports. And the idea is simple. Bring more women's sports leagues and women's sports stories to the table and make that spotlight intentional. I like the theme not to be kind of overbearing, right? It's not going to be everything and everything that I do on my table is going to be focused on those themes. But it does help bring some focus to part of my annual plan. And I think that that's what you're going to see this year. And as we get into talking about it, you'll see where this theme is going to fit in. Because in 2026, it's really going to happen where my tournaments are where my theme lives. I'll keep it accessible, the context. I'm going to have some quick updates for today and even throughout the year to give you some quick updates on how some of those leagues are going and some of the fun moments that I'm seeing in those. But let's talk podcast goals first, and then we'll get into some of the full playing plan. So podcast-wise, there are no major changes. This is season 6. Every year as the calendar turns, I kick off what's considered my new season. So with season 6, there's no major changes. I'm not going to reinvent the show, but I am going to kind of tighten the structure just a little. And that's because I want the season to flow a little bit better, and I want the planning episodes to feel more useful. One specific change is that there's going to be no more quarterly reviews. Instead, I'm going to do 4 seasonal shows. I'm going to try this year where I'm going to do a winter show. That would be next week, a spring show, a summer show, and a fall show. So we're replacing those quarterly reviews with these seasonal shows. And then each seasonal episode is going to be somewhat forward-looking. I might do a little bit of a look back too, just to recap. But most of it's going to be forward-looking, where I'm going to let you know what I'm planning to play, how I'm kind of tying it all together, and then how I align certain games to the season those sports typically happen in. And you'll see that mostly with my game of the week, which has a new theme this year as well. And then we'll get into that a little bit later as well. Why choose to do the seasonal beats instead of a quarterly review? Mostly it's I think going to help tie the theme of what I'm going to be planning to play a little bit better. And, you'll have a better feel for how I'm kind of taking my larger term approach to the project planning there too. And we'll get into that a little bit more as you'll hear about this a little bit more next week too. The next piece is, as far as like what's going to happen for the podcast, I would say I'm really going to be kind of like everything else is really doubling down on the content pillars that already work, right? Interviews, game reviews, top lists, and then those practical project planning tips. So I'm going to continue with my monthly interviews, which is that whole sitting down with segment, and I'll be highlighting game designers and members of the community. And the goal is always the same. I want to spotlight some of the great games that are out there, some of the cool projects people are working on, and then also, bring people on who can discuss some useful ideas that you can then bring back to your own table. So what are some of the things that I'm going to be doing? Some guest types, let me know if you want to reach out at Tabletop SportCast at gmail.com. Let me know what kind of guests you want to hear from, and I'll put those. I've got my list, but I would love to get some input from others on like, who are you wanted to hear like on the podcast? And if you're somebody who's running like a cool project, reach out, and that might be something we can work on too, to get you either like a spotlight or, even bring you on for an interview too. And then I'm also going to continue to build my review content through the inside look, right? That has been my kind of themed thing for talking through game reviews. And for me, these aren't just like ratings, right? In fact, I almost never will give a game a rating. It's more like, what's the experience that the game is trying to deliver, and then what kind of projects would it be perfect for? So that's, I'm going to continue to do that. I'm going to try to focus mostly on newer games, but every now and again, if it's a game that, maybe hits my table for the first time, and maybe it's not exactly a new game, it might get some time as well through the inside look. I always, when I try to review the games, I want to think about things like, what does this game do better than other games or than most games? What are some of the trade-offs that you're going to have, and who is it for, but who is also like not for? And, I think we all know that not every game is designed for every single person. So sometimes it's important to know, like, is that the type of game that's going to be something you want to get on your table? And then the next big pillar is like those top lists, top 10 lists, but not always 10, right? Sometimes it can be a different amount. And it always comes down to like, what does that topic actually need? And I'm going to look at different criteria, right? I want to make sure I don't get too repetitive on lists we've done in the past, but every now and again, there's something new that might come to the table that is a good theme for us to talk through. And I think the top list is a good way to approach some of those themes. So we'll definitely continue with those. And again, if you've got some ideas on topics, like send those in. Some of the ones I've done in the past have definitely come from listener feedback, and I will continue to embrace that as we go forward as well. And then lastly, the thread that really ties like everything together for the podcast is the project planning tips. Talking about the finish lines, talking about time boxing, tracking what matters, all the stuff that keeps projects moving forward. And that's what we're going to really focus on today, is this idea of project planning. So let's get into my annual plan and really the playing slate of what's going to happen. So as always, there's going to be a lot of familiarity when I get through my annual project here. I've got a lot of different segments to it, and some of these are going to sound very familiar for those of you who have listened in the past. And it always starts with History Maker Baseball, which is really my kind of evergreen anchor. And this year I've got 4 projects that I'm planning for History Maker Baseball. I'm thinking of these really as like 4 different story types. I've got one that's, getting to the finish line, one that's going to be more of like an event. There's another one that's like a saga, and then another one that's more like a league. First up is to conclude my 2024 Mets replay. I am currently right around, I finished 2025 with about 150 games done. So I only have about 12 games left to finish that season. Right now, I'm on pace. I think I'm one game through I got a couple games in this week. So I think now through 152 games, I'm one game behind the Mets pace that year. So that should wrap up in January. And the main goal here is simple. I just need to stick the landing, right? Like I would need to finish that story and then kind of do a proper post-game report. So we'll probably cover that in a future episode as we get that across the finish line. Again, 152 games in at this point, so I got 10 games left to get through for the rest of the season. And we'll get into the rest of that season soon enough. The second big piece of the puzzle is going to be using the 1998 Major League Baseball season. And here I've decided to do a single elimination bracket tournament. I haven't decided just yet how I'm going to seed it. This will be something I figure out during this course of this month, and I'll definitely provide some updates to you. But I love the idea of kind of the one and done baseball, like chaos approach. And I think that this is where you will be able to really see like where are those key upsets that take place. It's also really interesting because then you get into things like, how do you decide to use like pitching the right way, right? Because I'm still going to want to have the teams use like probably up to like 3 starting pitchers to get through a single elimination tournament. So I have to really think a little bit about who do they want to use and when. So for each of the teams, I'll also be thinking about that too. I haven't, when I talk about like, I haven't decided how I'm going to seed it yet. I'm either going to go like best to worst and seed everybody that way, or I'm just going to pick completely random matchups and just let those kind of fall as is. And I haven't, it's kind of a coin flip right now. So I haven't really decided which way that's going to go, but that'll be a single elimination tournament that I'll probably run over a couple of months. Then I think the bulk of my year is going to be spent on the 1980 Major League Baseball season, and I plan on doing a King of the Mountain tournament using that season. And this is really going to be kind of my long-form saga project, right? Like survive in advance, kind of defend the crown, watch the story evolve. How does a King of the Mountain work? For me, it's going to basically be just randomly picking teams that will challenge whoever is the top team. And I'll pick like 2 teams that I really want to see start the year. Maybe even like those 2 teams that were in the World Series that year, right? Like start with them and then start to rotate people in to see who can take the crown. Everybody will get a shot. And then I'll eventually decide like, when do they start to lose their chances there? Like, is it after like 2 losses or is it 3 losses? But at some point teams will start to dwindle away and I will be left with just the teams at the end. Right. So with the 1980 season, that's kind of what it's going to look like. And each one will be a single elimination, like, to take the crown. But obviously here you get into like, different pitching matchups too, right? Because obviously teams that are challenging will take whatever their next best pitcher is. Whereas the team in the top has to work with, they have to kind of work through their rotation as they're defending. So that part's going to be interesting as well. So that's how that will work. And eventually I'll be left with, 2 teams kind of battling it out for the final spot there. And that's how that will work. And so again, more to come in terms of like how that will play out. If I do it where teams are slowly getting eliminated, that's more of a rumble format. If I decide to do it for a set number of games and then just see who comes out as the winner, then that also becomes more of a traditional like King of the Mountain. So, but I'll have like a set target in terms of the number of games that I want to do for that one. And then lastly, I'm going to do a little mini season for the 1996 Major League Baseball season. And here it's going to be round robin. I'm going to do a round robin within each division. They'll play each of their opponents one time. And then whoever comes out as the winner of the division will then compete in a new round robin against all the other division winners. And then that will help me declare a champion. So this one will have a very set number of games that I'm going to be going with. And it's really kind of like a sprint without the grind of like a full season, you know? So I get to see all of the teams. I get to see them run through their rotations a little bit, you know, because everybody's going to play. Depending on the size of theirs, they're going to have either 3 or 4 games that they're going to play in their first round robin. And then after that, all the teams will have, I think it works out to there's 6 divisions, right? So everybody will have 5 games then. So, you know, all told, they're probably only playing like 9 or 10 games each. But it gives me a nice feel for each of the teams. And that's something that I like to do when I bring a season set in is make sure that I get a nice feel for like all the teams. I don't want to just have like a couple of teams that I'm focused in on. Sometimes it's the one team that I really want to focus in on, but I still want them to see everybody, right? So because I want to get a feel for that whole season set. All right, that's History Maker Baseball. Next up, it's the quarterly projects. And again, this has become kind of a standard bearer for me as well. I intentionally want to bring new games to the table. And when I say new games, I don't necessarily mean like brand new games. I just mean that I don't want to use the same games for quarterly projects that I've used last year. I want to like refresh the list a little bit. And then the whole point of this is to really give those games a real true spotlight. And I do also want to try to align my quarterly projects with the sports calendar so that the hobby is kind of matching the season that we're living in. So that being said, winter is going to be about working on the 75-76 ABA co-op that Andy Sexton is running. I'm going to be using mostly bank shot basketball. I might mix in a little bit of primetime basketball from Highlight Maker Hoops as well. But, you know, he's trying to capture stats. We want to capture like points scored, assists, rebounds. So I do need to use a full play game for this. But I'm hoping to get about 13 games in and see where those kind of fall within the schedule. Right now, the schedule's in the, I think November. We're at the end of November of 75. So I'm hoping to at least get some of the 76 games in, and that will align a little bit with the historical theme for me of, you know, going back 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, etc. And yeah, so that's going to be. I'm also going to start using the new Purple Wolf spreadsheet for this. So I'll be starting to track that as I go through that as well. I got one game in before the release of the Purple Wolf, but you know, Mike Ignatowski's new spreadsheet should help out a lot with me doing some of these replays. So I'm going to use that as I go through as well. In the spring, I'm going to change my attention over to wrestling. Using Face to the Mat. I want to go back to try a project that I started last year and kind of found it was too large. And so I figured out a way to make this work a little bit better. But I'm going to do that season replay for the WAF XSC Wrestling Federation, this dual fed, these competing federations in wrestling. I want to get through an entire season. But to do that in about 13 weeks means I have to do some compromising there. So one of the things that I thought about here is I'm going to actually have a lot of this be stories that are generated with my interactions with like ChatGPT to help drive like the main storylines and keep like a theme going. But then pick out some matches along the way that I really want to play out and have those help drive other storylines as well. So there will be I'll be playing some matches for some of the climatic moments, like maybe when like a grudge has reached its pinnacle and it's like, okay, here's the two guys or here's the two, tag teams, and let that be one of the big matches that I play. And so I won't be playing a lot of the matches, which I think was the mistake I made last time. Instead, what I'm going to do is really just try to focus in on a couple of matches here and there and get those out the door and have like a way of kind of telling the story as I go through. In the summer, we're going to switch to horse racing. I'm planning on doing a mini season, probably like 13 or so events, and I want to focus this on a historical year. Haven't decided which year it's going to be yet, and I haven't decided exactly which engine I'm going to use. I'm either going to use Play at the Races, the new play game, or hopefully by then I will have my own game design, and that is really where I want to target, is to have my game be the one that I use to do this. So a lot to happen still. Plenty of time to figure it out before like summer rolls along, because this would probably be starting in like July. So I have like 6 months to figure some things out before we get to that. What's driving my season choice? It's, for me, it's going to be what season can I create that has like a really good feel to it. Obviously, when I run through a season, I'll be picking races like the 3 Triple Crown races will certainly be part of it. The Breeders' Cup will definitely be part of it. And then I think there's some of the preseason races that I want to also include that are kind of like the Derby prep races that will be included in there too. So that's going to be my summertime project. And then in the fall, we're going to be getting into matchup college football. And fall is football, right? Like, I think that kind of is the dominant sport. And I love the idea of picking throughout all of the different season sets, or the different sets that ST has released, and looking for some of the fun matchups that I want to do. So I'm looking for some of those kind of big games, big vibes, no grind, and get some of the great matchups in history of college football. And what makes a matchup classic? They're going to be teams that I want to see. I certainly have gone through the list and come up with some of the great matchups there. We'll probably talk about this more in a future episode as well. But I love the idea of just like being able to pick them and then making sure that it's either a natural rivalry that I'm going to see on my table, or maybe 2 big players from a particular year, or couple years like from those sets. I think I did try to keep the matchups at least within the sets that he has released. So if it was like, he has like a set for the great running backs, like I want to make sure that I pick 2 teams that work from that particular set, not like mixing and matching teams from different sets against one another for the most part. So at the end, like, what does each quarter have? Like, it gives me a nice time box to kind of focus in and make sure that these like projects get finished, reach the finish line, without like being like overly drawn out. So I have to kind of size them appropriately to fit within that 13-week window. That's part 1 of it. And then part 2 is it means that it gets like to be like a focal point for that particular quarter as well. So yeah, it becomes a priority to get that project done over some of the other things that I'm going to be working on. And you might say, like, what are some of those other things? Well, let's talk tournaments. This is probably one of the places where I made the biggest changes to what I'm going to do for my plan. I've reduced the number of tournaments down from 12 to 8. I used to do a tournament every month. And now I'm trying to focus in on just doing 8 tournaments. So I have a good mix between 1 month and 2 month tournaments. Some of them only require like, a little bit of time because of the size of the league. Other ones needed a little bit more time, and I didn't want to try to force that into a 1 month time segment. I wanted to give myself like some more of like a 2 month project there. So I split these into two categories, the women's sports, as we mentioned earlier, and then also some of my retro replays. Category one for the women's sports, what we're going to focus in on, there was a lot of great offerings this year on some of the women's leagues. So I'm going to run a tournament for the 2025 WNBA, the 2025 PWHL, the 2014 NWSL. So I've got hoops, hockey, soccer. Then I'm also going to do a couple of all-time great sets. The heptathlon, I'm going to bring that back and run a tournament style, 1v1. As I go through that, that'll be using the decathlon game, but the heptathlon rules. And then the last one will be using the all-time great women's tennis, and I'll be doing that for Let's Play Tennis. We'll be running through a bracket and have to decide like which of the surfaces I'll be using, or maybe mix and match those. So more to come on that. The second category is my retro replays, which is what I've kind of changed the branding for my historical replays into retro replays. What I've done here is obviously like with my retro replays, I try to go back 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, all the way through and pick out like what are some of the signature moments that I want to do there. And we'll be talking more about those in each of the seasonal shows, the winter, summer, spring, like all those shows. I'll get more into like what I'm doing from my game of the week, which is, we're going to talk about in a second, and then these retro replays. But there were three that I really wanted to bring forward and say, this needs to be more than just a single game. I want to make this into more of a mini project. So I'm going to do a tournament with the 1986 Major League Baseball season using Payoff Pitch. I'm going to do a tournament of sorts with the 1966 NFL AFL using season ticket football. And then I'm also going to do a tournament project with the 75-76 NHL using 49 highlights hockey. That gets three games that I really wanted to focus in a little bit more on this year and give them a sense of purpose. So that's going to be doing that. And I love the idea of like going to fewer tournaments. One of the things I was trying to do was think of a way to create more time for things like game design and for the podcast, not feel crunched a little bit. So this was a good place to kind of step back a little bit. And I don't necessarily think it means I'm playing less games, but it's less commitments to it. And I think what happened in the past is forcing things into a 1 month segment meant I was getting a lot of games that I had to get done. I pushed a couple last year to 2 months and found it was a much better pacing for me. So this is going to be a better story arc for me and allow me to kind of like manage this when it's down to 8 instead and kind of mixing between those 1 and 2 month projects. Lastly, we're going to talk kind of like more about how I fill in the gaps, right? You heard the big boulders, you hear the big stones with the quarterly, you heard more of this tiny rocks with my tournament. These are more the pebbles now, and that is two big themes. One is rebranding my game of the week into what I'm calling now the Featured Table Fridays. New game every week, right? And what I'm going to do is this is going to be very fluid. I have planned out like 52 games that I plan to play, right? Some of these are part of what I also have as my historical replays, as you heard, the retro replays. Some of the retro replays will also be in this mix too. But the ones that are remaining will be games that I wanted to get to the table. And you could hear so far, like between History Maker Baseball, my quarterly projects, the tournaments, I've got different games hitting the table all the time. But there's still a lot of other games that I feel like need to get to my table. And that's really what that Featured Table Friday is about. It's also a place where I keep it fluid, though, because new games are going to get released throughout this year, and I might want to get them to the table, too. In fact, I almost definitely will. So as I add new games, I might bump other games from this Featured Table Friday list. And in the end, I finish with a good number of games hitting the table. And the plan is still to have like 50 or 60 different games that will hit my table. So feature table Fridays, weekly spotlight. Each week I'll kind of share like what it was that, why that game made it to my table. The retro replays, we'll talk a little bit about those as they happen. They're usually about one a month, that will, kind of connect it to the overall kind of retro theme there. And that will be it. So that gets us through everything that I've kind of planned so far for the game playing, right? And that's going to be a majority of it. Will there be other things that I do? Probably. There's going to be other things like co-ops or community run events that I'll probably add to the mix as well. But for the most part, like this is the core of what I'm planning. And I would say it's going to cover like 80% of like my game playing. There's a good portion of my game playing that goes into the final thing we're going to talk through today, which is my game design goals. Obviously, I've got to do some play testing. So as I'm designing games, I'm also going to need to get those to the table as well. On the game design side, I've got a very clear target this year, which I talked a little bit about, which is debuting Track the Pack. That's my horse racing game. I am hoping to have that as a finished product for IndyCon 26 in April. Now, to make that real, I'm going to have to get back to my project planning roots. I'm going to be working in sprints, probably month-long sprints. I'm going to be writing like clear stories on what I actually have progress look like. And then making sure that each sprint kind of ends with something tangible. There should be, at the end of each month, I should have another collection of finished products that gets added to what this game is going to finally be. And that's the goal first and foremost. What does a finished product mean, though? It means my rules are really locked in, that I'm able to teach the game. It's been play tested to a degree. My sprint philosophies are mostly going to be to focus the primary amount of my capacity or story points is going to be on whatever the main product is that I'm working on. And for the first part of for the first quarter, it's going to be Track the Pack. But I also want to dedicate some of my story points to working on moving other games forward too, because I have a few other things that I want to do, and they're at various stages of completion. But really, none of them should get to the finish line before Track the Pack, right? So things will be happening behind the scenes in addition to me working on the primary product. Every now and again on the podcast, I'll share some of my design notes or some maybe it'll be like a play test, like post game, some kind of thing like that, that will also be something I could share that will help tie in some of the project themes that I like to do throughout the podcast as well. So when I do share a design project, it's going to be that I find something useful, like a lesson learned or a change that helps improve the play, or just a milestone that makes it feel real, or something that I think will really help you like with project planning as well, right? Those are the kinds of updates that you'll hear from me when it comes to the game design. All right, that's really a wrap on like what we've got for this week's episode. Real high level, didn't want to get in the weeds too much on anything. And again, starting next week, we'll get into that. But for now, let's just come back and wrap up today's episode. So that's the annual plan, a clear theme. Baseball anchors all my projects. Then I've got my seasonal, like quarterly projects, 8 tournaments with 2 clean categories, and then a design deadline that kind of keeps me honest. And if you want to follow along, keep an eye out for those seasonal shows that will start next week with the winter show. And then tell me this, like which tournaments are you most excited to hear updates on? What should I put on the featured table first? I already got my first one done, but there might be more to come. And that'll be it. So next week, we're going to get into like what the overall theme is for the winter. We'll get in a little bit more in depth into some of the games that I plan on playing, like what the purpose is going to be for those, get maybe a little bit more in depth on what's happening with that quarterly project. So we'll catch you up on all of that starting next week. But until then, thanks for listening.